Welcome Beyond the Reiki Gateway. I'm your host, Andrea Kennedy. Like countless others, Reiki found me when I wasn't even looking, and then it ignited a whole new world of questions. This podcast explores topics of interest for the spiritually curious. Join me for discussions and special guests on subjects such as past lives, crystal healing, spiritual awakening, ascension, energy healing, and more, all to assist and inspire you along your unique soul's journey. This episode is sponsored by Mainstream Reiki, offering live and online Reiki classes and a membership community to help Reiki practitioners succeed and grow in their practice. Find out more at mainstreamreiki.com. Welcome to Beyond the Reiki Gateway. I am your host, Andrea Kennedy. I'm delighted to have for you today Brett Bevell. He's a Reiki Master, author, and innovator in the world of energy healing. He's written several books, including Psychic Reiki and the Reiki Magic Guide to Self-Attunement. His work is featured on the Solvana app by Mind Valley. Brett has recently created the new Reiki Divine Healing card deck, and that's designed to help people connect with healing energy in an intuitive, accessible way. A longtime teacher and practitioner, he blends traditional Reiki with higher, self-guided techniques that bring healing into everyday life. He's also a poet and a performer whose work has been aired on NPR, and he's touched audiences worldwide. And Brett, I'm delighted to have you here. I've known about you for probably, I can honestly say, decades. Um, if I'm honest. And so to have you here, you haven't been on the show before. It's just really delightful. So thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today. So thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. I mentioned I have known about you for decades. And so I guess I'd like to fill in our audience a little bit. How is that even possible? Because, Reiki is much more popular these days. But my goodness, back then when you got started with it, nobody knew what Reiki was. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, a few people did, but it certainly wasn't as popular as it is today. And, my first experience with Reiki was quite uh, serendipitous, I guess I would say, in that I received my first Reiki session after having a very challenging experience at the NYU Dental Center in New York City. And my roommate happened to be a Reiki practitioner. He didn't really talk about Reiki. I had no idea what Reiki was, but when he saw me come home after having a wisdom tooth pulled and being in a lot of pain, he offered to do some Reiki on me. And this was in 1993. And as soon as his hands touched my face, I just felt this connection to something that was bigger than me and bigger than him. And I think most important, bigger than the pain that I was experiencing. And it allowed me to just magically go into this place of deep surrender and falling into this place of grace where it's not that the pain went away 100%, but it was this deep sense of knowing that I was going to be okay. I was going to get through this. And maybe even more important than that was this sense of being held by the universe in this very conscious, intentional way. And it was a real eye opener for me. Like, wow, the universe, or this higher power is just conscious of me now, here in this moment. And I feel that presence. And so I'm like, I want to know more what this stuff Reiki is and how do I learn it? And so Eben told me about his teacher, a woman named Elka Petra-Palm, who I believe still teaches in New York City. She, was a member of the Reiki Alliance. And so I got my first training with her back in 1993.
Wow. So I want to rewind actually just a little bit because you were open to Reiki. Even not having any familiarity with it at all. And so what about your upbringing allowed that? I mean, were you brought up in a religious household or a spiritual household?
I wasn't, but I do, I do think there's a connection with my upbringing in the sense that I had a very challenging and very traumatic childhood. And so after college, I was very deeply committed to trying to heal those wounds. And I was spending pretty much every last dollar I had on going to different kinds of therapy, doing what I could to try to work on myself, also going to different 12-step programs and just doing as much deep inner work as I could. And in that sense, I think through the 12-step work, that sense of a higher power, that sense of um, there being something that is beyond just uh, we humans in terms of consciousness in the universe. And so that had really opened the door to me in the sense of, okay, there's some other power that's beyond what we always recognize in terms of the scientific world. And through that, I had kind of experimented or flirted with different, alternative forms of healing. I had been to a Native American sweat lodge before I had been to Reiki. I had explored different sort of energetic techniques that weren't Reiki, but that were more like visualizing color coming out your hands and things like that. So I was already kind of on a journey to find any kind of healing that I could. And so I think maybe that allowed me to be more open to the energy of Reiki when it did show up for me.
I just find that so mature of you at that age, to have that openness and prioritize your healing like that, because I have to imagine, society is telling you you need to do this and that and the next thing, in order to be, acceptable and successful and that kind of thing. But it sounds like you really took your own path even way back then.
Yeah, I mean, it really felt to me it was just it was the journey I was on, and a big part of it goes to I have to credit an acting teacher I had, a man named Eric Morris, who he may still be teaching in Hollywood. I don't know. He's probably in his 90s now if he is teaching. But he had worked with a number of well-known actors, Jack Nicholson, Terry Garr, some others. He was a very profoundly wise method acting teacher, and he would teach these techniques to really open up his students. And shortly after I got out of college, I actually lived in his theater for about 6 months in Hollywood, near the corner of Hollywood and Vine. I would sleep on the floor of his theater and he didn't charge me any rent. I just had to pay for my acting classes. And the work that he was doing there was so transformational that I remember seeing other therapists in the Los Angeles area that would take his classes. I think they were taking his classes not that they wanted to be actors, but they just wanted to learn what he was doing to really open people up to their own emotional body and their own sense of kind of emotional sovereignty. And so these techniques he had were very powerful. And so I felt so opened in the work that I was doing with him. It just kind of blew me open into this. I just have to learn more. How can I heal? How can I open up? How can I explore this level of healing in ways that were probably far beyond what was traditionally available for most people.
Yeah, I just find that unique and remarkable, I have to say. But so you started in 1993 with Reiki, and you took a level one class at that time.
Yeah, it was a level one class with Elka Petra Palm, and it was interesting because she was teaching the class out of her apartment in the Upper West Side of New York City, and it was one of those things where we people would show up for an introductory talk, and then those people who wanted to continue on for the training would stay behind for the training. And even though it was an amazing talk, I was the only person that stayed behind, so it ended up being a one-on-one, which I actually really valued. That I was getting all that attention. Yeah, and it was a beautiful, wonderful training from her. A couple of years later, I ended up getting my second degree from a woman named Mary Robertson, who was teaching independently. She was teaching near the University of Dayton. I think she actually lived in Tennessee, but she had some arrangement with the University of Dayton where she could teach her class there on a weekend. And so I got that second degree while I was in Ohio, and that was in early 1995. And then I got my master's degree later in 1995 while I was seasonal staff at Omega Institute through a woman named Mary Dudek, who had studied not directly with William Rand, but through one of his students. So that lineage goes back to William.
Oh, interesting. And so you've had training in different styles, different lineages. And could you share with us the different uh, classes that you've taken?
Yeah. So the what I really appreciated about learning from different Reiki masters in my journey was that each had their own perspective, and their own way of doing things. And so I feel like in my journey, I've been able to pull from that what has worked for me, and then also let go maybe the pieces that didn't work as much, but that were then supplanted by techniques that another teacher would bring in. So I really appreciated everything that I learned from each of my teachers along the way. And then, after I got my master level in 1995, I also then shortly after that moved to San Francisco and did some shamanic studies with a fellow named Jack Gray, who was a very old healer in the Huna shamanic techniques from ancient Hawaii. And the funny thing was, even though he wasn't teaching Reiki, when I talked to him, I learned that he had actually known Hawaii Takata way back when. He said he had actually knew her when she was living in Hawaii, and that he felt that it was his conversations with her around the opportunities she would have if she moved to San Francisco that he felt helped kind of spur her to move on to San Francisco. So again, I wasn't studying Reiki with him, but it was just interesting that he had a connection to Takata as well. So
Oh yeah, that is fascinating. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot in San Francisco. I talk to people, and San Francisco comes up quite a bit in their journeys. I think that I don't know, that's just kind of coming to the forefront of my memory at the moment. But so you studied with him and you learned techniques from him. And yeah, so yeah, every teacher that we do have, I totally agree. And also, we're not the same. So we learn and grow and evolve, and then we could even retake the same level of Reiki, um, even with the same teacher, but it might be years later, and we'll get totally different things out of the class, out of the information. It'll just resonate in a whole different way. So I think it's just magical with so many layers to that of the experience. So, um, yeah, and I like that you said you took what worked for you, and then you just kind of set aside different things as you evolved. And then what was the first book that you wrote? What was the first book?
the first book I wrote is one. It's called The Reiki Magic Guide to Self-Attunement. And I have to say that the title, that was not my original title, um, because I feel that the term self-attunement is a little not true. So there is an attunement that one can get from the book, but it's actually an attunement that is sent by me through time and space to any person who makes a very specific action that the book mentions. It was the publisher, once they bought the rights to the book, that decided to call it self-attunement. And I kind of argued with them as much as I could, but when they own the rights, they own the rights. So I always feel like I need to put that little disclaimer in there that it's not so much a self-attunement. It was an attunement sent by me through time and space to whoever says these particular phrases and engages in this particular little ritual in the book. And the idea behind the book was not as a certification course or training in that way, but just to allow people to have access to the energy and then be able to perform healings on themselves, family members, and just kind of as a way to open that light up in them so that they can get a sense of what Reiki is, and then maybe, hopefully, then go on and take a more robust training in person with myself or somebody, so that they're getting that hands-on direct experience.
I find that really, I don't know, daring, I'm going to say, to put that out, because I actually remember that book and I remember the title. And I, of course, didn't understand, what you just explained. And I thought, I mean, I'm going to be totally honest, Brett. I thought, whoa, what's he doing? You know, what is this guy doing out there? Because, I started with Reiki in 1995. I had a level one class in 95, but I very different from you. I was very mainstream and I didn't feel a thing. And I just was like, what is this? And the only thing that helped me stick with it was feedback I got. Cause I was so in my brain, so in my thoughts and analytical thinking that I just couldn't wrap my head around it, couldn't sense anything. So, but the feedback, oh, just kept my curiosity. But yeah, then when I read that, when I saw your book out there, and I was judgy, and I thought, well, gosh, that flies in the face of everything that I've ever heard, about Reiki. And so, but that's, I think, when you first entered, my radar in the Reiki world. And so I really appreciate the fact that you're putting it out there like this about what your intention was and how that publisher, did that. But it also brings up something I think that's very um, important, and that is, well, two things. Number one, that this energy can be utilized by anyone, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely believe so, for sure.
And then the second point would be that there are many paths to working with the energy, and maybe people and how they intend and what they choose, um, and how they choose to engage with it could be unique to them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely would agree with that. And I think too, just to kind of add in about the book, that what I've found with the book is that many times it's because I do get emails and Facebook messages and things from people around the world, that often it will lead again to being an opening for somebody, that then they go deeper into becoming really deeply trained, and then in many cases opening their own practice or teaching. So it was meant to be, and it is meant to be, just kind of a doorway to kind of give more access to people, so that they can take that baby step in, become more familiar with the energy, see the results. How does it feel in their body? What are the changes that are happening in their own life? And then step forward to then moving into getting their official training in person, whether it's from me or another qualified teacher.
The ability of people to evolve, I think, is often overlooked. And what I mean by that is there can be a lot of judgment out in the world about the type of class you take, and the platform. Is it recorded? Is it not? Is it online? There's a lot of judgment, unfortunately, about that. And um, one of the things that I myself have seen is exactly what you're saying. Sometimes people like take a class on YouTube, however, just in a recorded thing or whatever. And I talked about on the podcast before that I actually tried that, just because I was curious. And so I'm like, oh, okay, learn Reiki. And it was something like in 8 minutes, I had a Reiki Master certificate, with my name on it. And I had done nothing, right? But in doing that, though, it I found it educational, for one thing.
Hmm.
But what I've really found through my own teaching and meeting people is Reiki will meet them wherever they are. And if it's a YouTube thing or whatever, or a very just a PowerPoint, online, whatever that is, it can be the kernel for a person to get started. And I find that really exciting. So I look at it so much differently today than, maybe I would have 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And um, uh, yeah, many paths.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I think in the beginning of my Reiki journey, there's certainly things where I held certain judgments that that now looking back, I'm like, well, why was I judging that? And so I think our students evolve, we evolve, we're all hopefully moving forward in a positive way.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And so you have started with Reiki, you had different teachers, and then you've developed some techniques also through the years. And so, could you talk about some of those? What else have you? And I'm going to use the word innovated, and I don't use that word, lightly, because the way I look at it, you have innovated in this space, and so I wanted to highlight that in our time together.
Yeah, I'll talk about kind of my journey with those innovations, and it would first go back to me. I'd mentioned the Huna shaman Jack Gray, who I had worked with for a number of years in San Francisco. And again, he wasn't teaching me Reiki. He was different. He was teaching me these very powerful Huna Hawaiian shamanic techniques for connecting with your higher self, and then working with your higher self to do deep healing, clearing cords, and working with the subconscious, etc. And again, he wasn't teaching me Reiki, but I would always come back from his sessions and wonder, like, what if? And I just had this thought, like, okay, well, maybe my higher self's already attuned to Reiki, but what if I attuned my higher self to Reiki, and then used these techniques he's teaching me to then ask my higher self to do things with Reiki that maybe weren't traditionally taught, or not, at least I had never been taught. And so that's what I did. And then I would do that, and then I would do these techniques of connecting with my higher self and ask it to do things. And it was showing me things. I was seeing things that were outside the traditional spectrum of what one would consider possible with Reiki. And so that kind of became the subject matter of my first two books, The Reiki Magic Guide to Self-Attunement, and then the follow-up to that, which is Reiki for Spiritual Healing, were more about working with these higher self techniques. And then the funny thing is, literally when I was writing the final edits in 2007, going over the final edits of the Reiki Magic Guide to Self-Attunement, I was in Laos. I was in the former capital of Laos, a beautiful village really called Luang Prabang, with all these amazing Buddhist temples. And I was very, very sick. I got sick when I got there. All the guidebooks said, if you can avoid going to a Laotian hospital, it's much better than because you're probably going to come out with something much worse than what you had going in. So I didn't want to go to the hospital. I had a fever. My spleen felt like it was swollen up like the size of a small grapefruit. And so I just basically hid in my room in the guest house I was staying at for a couple of days, and just did nonstop energy healing on myself. And it feels to me like, looking back on it, this felt like a test, because during that time, at one point, I literally heard a voice in my head say, "Would you like a new spleen?" And I'm like, "Yes." And instantly, I suddenly felt fine. Now, am I saying that physically that a new spleen appeared in my body? No, but I do believe there was some kind of instantaneous transmutation that occurred, that suddenly the fever was gone. I felt fine. The swelling was gone. I was incredibly hungry because I had been hiding in my room for a couple of days. And a few blocks away from where I was staying, there was this small little Indian food establishment. And I went there and I ordered my favorite dish, aloo gobi. I sat down in a chair. There were these little white plastic chairs outside and a little white plastic table. So I'm sitting in my chair waiting for my food. There's an empty plastic chair next to me. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I just felt this amazing presence just appear in that chair. And I had this instantaneous just knowing that it was the presence of Mikao Usui. And I felt in that moment, I felt from Mikao Usui this ball of white light go into the area of my heart chakra, which put me into this altered state of consciousness that I was literally going in and out of for a period of weeks. And I didn't fully comprehend what happened in that moment, to be quite honest. But over the next few weeks, I would often see these very complex mathematical equations that I had no understanding of. I could tell they were complex math equations, but I couldn't fully comprehend them. But when I would see them, I would have this deep sense of that eternal presence that is in everything, that's in a spoon or a glass of water or the leg of a chair, just that infinite eternal presence. And so I was, again, just in this, going in and out of this altered state for a couple of weeks. And then eventually, after a period of a few weeks, I came to the realization that it wasn't just this ball of white light that I got hit with, that there was an energetic structure that was now there in front of my heart chakra that I refer to as the Reiki crystal. So if you can imagine, not a physical crystal, but an energetic crystal made out of the light of Reiki that was now sitting in front of my heart chakra, and that I could have it send Reiki by simply talking to it either with my voice or my mind, and it would send Reiki. So it was very user friendly in that way, and I also found that it could do things that were, again, kind of outside the traditional landscape of Reiki. And so that work then evolved into what now I refer to as psychic Reiki. And by psychic, what I mean is that psychic conversation between a person and what I call the Reiki crystal, that energetic crystal that will sit in front of their heart chakra. And so that has really been where the next few books or next few stages of the work developed in terms of my own kind of journey with Reiki.
That's just remarkable, your whole experience there. Yeah, would you like a new spleen? I can just hear people out there saying, "Ooh, I want to know this. I want to know that." Let me put my order in. I I'm fascinated by that story for a lot of different reasons, but how it unfolded so naturally. People seek often. They're seeking and trying and striving, and they want to have an experience such similar to what you described. And how it just unfolded like that is just beautiful, really. I What I wanted to ask you about is the first thing is where were you as far as in your journey with Reiki at that point? Were you a master at that point? Where were you?
I was a master, and I had, I had already had the contract with 10 Speed Crossing Press, who were the publishers for my first two books, the Reiki Magic Guide to Self Attunement and Reiki for Spiritual Healing. So, we were basically in the process of the final edits of that first book, and so I was teaching some. I was also working at Omega Institute, running their seasonal staff program. So teaching a lot of the seasonal staff at Omega Institute. I had created a whole 5-month training for the seasonal staff at Omega that would involve teaching them Reiki up through the master level, something that we actually it no longer exists, but we used to call it the Peace Guild. So what we would do, it was me and there was a co-teacher as well, where we would teach them energy healing and also different shamanic techniques. And in exchange, we would ask them to be sending healing light out into the world to just try to, make the world a better, more peaceful place. And so that what we called the Peace Guild existed at Omega up until after, right around the time of COVID. And then because with COVID, the size of the seasonal staff was substantially diminished, where they just really don't have the bandwidth to allow for those more long-term programs with the staff. But it was a wonderful program that we had for a number of years. So I was, teaching students there, and also, at small venues here and there outside of Omega as well.
It reminds me of a recent conversation I had here on the podcast with Simon Bown. And we were talking about near death experiences and how miraculous healings can happen as a result. So, someone will die, be in another realm, and decide to come back. And, a lot of people know the story of Anita Morjani,
Mm-hmm.
also very similar. And when they come back, the body is healed. Or in Anita's case, she had, I mean, stage 4 cancer. It was just terrible, but she knew her body would heal. And sure enough, it took a little bit of time, but complete healing. And so when you were talking about your own healing, what with the spleen, that's what it kind of reminded me of. And I remember asking Simon about this when we were recording the podcast. And I said something to him like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could bring that level of healing to our lives without the dying part? And how would we do that? How could we Is there a way that we could do that? And so as I was listening to your story, that's what it brought up for me, because in a way, that's what happened. in a way, at least from my perspective. But what do you think about that? Do you think that healing like that, are we on our way to be able to get the new spleen when we need it?
I mean, I do believe that, there's many kinds of energy healing miracles that happen all the time, whether it's through Reiki or angel healing or the kinds of experiences that, near death, like Anita Morjani had. So I so believe that there are very few limits to what is possible, that often the main limit is our own consciousness, or to be willing to accept the miracle that may be right in front of us. And again, that when I look back in my own story, the fact that I said yes, would you like a new spleen? Yes. Well, I mean, I could have said no. I could have said, well, I'm not sure. Who are you? I could have questioned it, but in that moment, it was just like, no, I was just in a place of complete surrender to yes, please, give me that new spleen or that transformation. And so I think sometimes when we're just in that place of surrender, that true sense of grace or that sense of miracles can show up for us in a way that we are hopefully very receptive to.
The word surrender is a powerful one, and it just lit up for me when you brought it up. And I've often reflected personally about Usui and the story of him receiving Reiki. And surrender is something that I feel um, in regards to that experience for him, because he had meditated and fasted for so long that he had to be so weak and at the point of true surrender. And yet that is what he received, was the gift of Reiki. And so I think that there's really something to this, as we're sitting here having this conversation, this surrender. And hmm, so let's circle back then.
Yeah.
So this crystal, um, explain for us, how does the crystal work? Do you still work? I mean, I'm really just getting ahead of myself, because what I want to ask first is, do you still utilize this crystal? Tell us about this.
Yeah,
Tell us about this crystal.
certainly. So yeah, I utilize the crystal all the time, and I do teach it as a kind of a different style of Reiki. And again, I still have great reverence for and still teach traditional trainings, teach at Omega Institute and elsewhere. But I also teach this form that I call psychic Reiki, where in the process a person is empowered to their own Reiki crystal. And so, a person will then, receive that energetic crystal that will then become part of their energy field, sits in front of the heart chakra. And I show them how to then work with it simply by talking to it, whether they want to talk with a slight whisper or just talk straight from their mind, whatever they're comfortable with. And we'll then, teach them how to utilize that crystal to send Reiki first in a self-healing to themselves, the different organs and organ systems, then also to another person or to a group of people, or to the land, to the trees, etc. One thing that I really love about this particular system is the variety of possibilities that, again, are kind of outside the traditional landscape. And one of them is something that I refer to as a Reiki hologram. So the Reiki crystal can create an energetic replica of a particular organ or organ system as Reiki light, as though that organ or organ system was in a place of perfect health. And actually, I have a really wonderful story about that process. It doesn't involve me. It involves a dear friend of mine, a woman named Michelle Denis, who lives in Vancouver, Canada, and is a Reiki Master. She had founded the West Coast Reiki Center there. And her husband, Fred, used to own a restaurant. And one day he was sweeping some snow off the skylight in that restaurant, and actually fell through the skylight, smashed his rib cage against the grill in the kitchen of that restaurant and had to, they had to call the ambulance. And luckily, Michelle was not far away when this happened, so she was able to be there almost immediately for him. And shattered rib cage is is painful. So what she immediately began doing was asking her Reiki crystal to create Reiki holograms of his ribs in a place of perfect health, and to continuously keep infusing those Reiki holograms into his physical ribs. And she kept doing that over and over again. And Fred was still in pain. He was still, having a painful experience. His ribs were still broken. They weren't certainly, magically 100% fine. But what the ambulance EMT crew realized when they first saw him was that he didn't seem to be at the level of pain that he should be, considering the kind of injury he had. He was in pain, but he wasn't screaming at the top of his lungs the way they thought he should be given his injury. And then same thing, she shared the same thing when they got to the emergency room, that the doctors again were a little perplexed that given the nature of his injury that he wasn't in more pain. Fast forward through the process, he ended up healing from it in a much faster timeline than what the doctors anticipated. And again, during this whole time, Michelle is repeatedly creating Reiki holograms of his rib cage in a place of perfect wholeness and just infusing those continuously into his rib cage. So that concept or that technique, it's not that his ribs were suddenly magically 100% fine, but what it was doing was creating an energetic, competing energetic signature in his body, where his body was also emanating that sense of perfect health through the Reiki hologram. So it helped him heal faster, or at least Michelle and I both believe that it was an important part of his healing process. So that's one technique that I really like from the Reiki crystal, these concepts of Reiki holograms. There's another concept in there that I refer to as a Reiki laser, where the Reiki crystal can create an intense beam of Reiki light that it can then place between any 2 points in time and space. And so what I will often do when I'm doing healings using psychic Reiki is I will ask the Reiki crystal to create Reiki lasers connecting from each and every bone in a person's body to each and every other bone within their body, manifesting this beautiful web of Reiki light existing inside of them. And whenever I do that, at that point in the healing, I can almost feel just this sense of tension release, and just like there's a whole other level that the healing goes to when that gets manifested in a person's field. Those same Reiki lasers, the Reiki crystal can also run those through time, so through timelines, so running them through an organ or organ system, sometimes from the moment of a person's birth up to the present moment, or from the moment of a certain trauma up to the certain moment, just to clear the timelines of those organs and organ systems. And then one other aspect of the Reiki crystal that I really enjoy is that it can bring people into very particular meditative states. And so again, if you think of a crystal made out of the light of Reiki, and even in my traditional trainings, I was always hearing and also believe that the energy has an intelligence, so that there's a wisdom in the intelligence. So if there's a crystal that's made out of the energy, it would also have that intelligence or that wisdom. So what I found is that I can ask the Reiki crystal to bring a person or a group of people into a particular meditative state, and will almost instantaneously bring them into a place of whether it's inner peace or self-love or forgiveness. And so having that, again, just as another tool to weave into the healing process is really powerful and beneficial. And so those are just some aspects of what the Reiki crystal can do that, again, are sort of a little outside the box of the landscape of traditional training. So yeah, I certainly still use the Reiki crystal quite often, and love using it. It's very versatile. It's also very, very user friendly, because I see it as an energetic, what's the right word? Almost like an omega point for the consciousness of Reiki, and that crystal, it knows the symbols, right? I don't need to tell it to use this. It knows the symbols. It has all that wisdom inside of it already. And so I can just simply ask it to send Reiki here, send Reiki there, and it can also do many things simultaneously. So it's a really lovely tool, and I love sharing it, and I love working with it. So it's certainly certainly still part of my repertoire to work with that Reiki crystal.
I brought up some judgment earlier that's out there, in the Reiki world. And I wonder if someone walks up to you and says, Brett, I've heard of this Reiki thing, but I don't know anything about it. What is Reiki? What is your definition that you would offer someone?
So I often, but I think because my son's 10 years old and he loves to watch Star Wars, I often use the analogy of it being like the Force in Star Wars, but a force that is used for healing, and that is used for awakening, and helping to release suffering. And I think, again, because I love my little boy and he loves Star Wars, and so spend a lot of time watching those shows, and it just makes sense to me, that seems to be a very common, most people can understand the Force, and so to explain it using that language for me is a way that makes it an accessible explanation. So again, just this force that is around us, that is inside of us, that is connecting everything, and that can be used for very powerful healing, and that has its own intelligence. So again, we don't own it. It's not our energy. It's coming through us. It's from beyond us, and has its own wisdom and its own intelligence, and always is always working for the highest good. So that's the one place where I would see it as being different from the Star Wars Force. I don't see there being any dark side to it. It's always working for the highest good and for the benefit of all.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you there for sure. What about, though, I find it intriguing that you teach the more traditional style of Reiki and then this more evolved way of interacting with the energy. And some would say directing the energy, by asking the crystal to do certain things and that kind of thing. How do you bridge those two worlds? How do you have a foot in each one and successfully navigate that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's something that I think in my own journey, I've been at different places on that spectrum in my journey. I think when when the Reiki crystal first came to me, I think I was kind of the belief or the sense that, okay, well, someday my practice is just going to be psychic Reiki, and I won't be doing the traditional techniques anymore, and that it's just a matter of when the time is right for me to make that shift. But I don't know that I have an audience for that, so let me just keep continuing to teach the traditional. And so that's, just being transparent, that's where I was at for a while. But as I would continue teaching the traditional courses, which I teach primarily at Omega, what I would find was that, those weekends are always amazing and beautiful, right? When you're performing that attunement on a person, and then they're sharing with you what that has done for them, what that in that moment, before you've even shown them hand positions or shown them other, I'll do the attunement on everyone who's there, and then I have a moment of sharing. That's how I teach the class. And so the sharing that happens within that first, those first minutes after the group is attuned, is quite profound. And so, and to just share the group healings that happen when there's several people around one person on a table, and we're just going through, hand positions as we would with a level 1 training. The kinds of reactions and the deep power that happens in the room is so palpable that over the years I've realized, well, why would I want to walk away from that, right? And can't these things coexist? It can't I teach the traditional training and still be true to it and honor it, and also, offer this other wisdom that has come to me through the Reiki crystal. So I really now feel more like that it's an extension. It's not that that it has to be an either or, but it's really they are an extension of each other. Without the traditional, the Reiki crystal never would have come into being. I see it as an evolutionary stage, and so you can't wipe away what came before it. I mean, I guess a person could or would want to, but to me, it makes no sense. So it's honoring that tradition of where it came from and still finding deep value and a lot of healing magic there. Again, just noticing the expressions on people's faces, and also just how I feel as a teacher when the weekend is done. Like, I always feel really wonderful and beautiful sharing that work. So for that reason, it's been where my own position has evolved over time. Where for me now, it's really that both are valid and relevant, and it's okay for me to share both.
And isn't that just so fitting with Reiki? It's so fitting, isn't it? It shouldn't have to be an either or from my perspective. It just shouldn't, it's all good. It's all good. And it meets people where they are because, some people will be drawn to a more traditional approach and some people will be drawn to a more progressive approach or that evolved, the evolved techniques. But I, I very much feel that Reiki helps us open up to things and evolve personally. It's evolving from my perspective. And I don't know, maybe you could speak about this, but I don't really necessarily think Reiki's evolving. I think we're evolving and we
Yeah.
can access and utilize the energy in new ways because of our changing.
Yeah,
What do
yeah,
you think? Yeah.
I would totally agree with that. That I think as our consciousness evolves, we can see things that have probably been there for a very long time, but we weren't able to see them, or we weren't able to acknowledge them or process them. And as we evolve in our own human awareness, then I think we become more aware of the potentials that exist with not just Reiki, but other spiritual healing possibilities. So yeah, I would agree with you on that.
It's exciting. Isn't it exciting to be on the planet right now? What do you
Definitely a time of great change and tremendous possibility.
what would you what would you say about these times besides that? Where do you see us going in the healing landscape? Humanity, what we can do, what we can accomplish. What do you see?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I see, and I see that a lot of what I've worked with in not just the Reiki crystal, but in my own work is bringing the light of Reiki. And it's a very big question that you just asked. I'm going to kind of try to focus it within the Reiki landscape, particularly that bringing that light of Reiki outside of simply the human-centric focus. And by that, I mean that a lot of the work that I've done has involved attuning trees, working with trees, asking trees to be part of my my healing group when I'm sending. Uh, uh, there's a particular tree at Omega that I work with all the time when I'm at a meeting that's stressful. People often see me a half hour later sitting in front of a tree. They don't know what's going on, but I'm literally asking that tree to send me some energy healing. So working with the trees in that way, working with animals. I know that there's beautiful work that Colleen Benelli and others are doing with animal Reiki, but also, I also see Reiki working within so-called inanimate objects. I mean, the whole concept of my Reiki deck involves Reiki crystals that are put into cards, and then those cards are literally kind of programmed to elicit different vibrations or different functions within that. But even going back many, many years ago, back when I was living in San Francisco and studying with Jack Gray, I used to go to one of the beaches in San Francisco called Land's End, where there were these beautiful beach stones. And I would gather some beach stones and I would take them back to my little apartment. and I attuned them to Reiki. And when I would want to experience a beautiful session, I would simply lay on my table and lay these amazing beach stones on my body, and they would be emanating Reiki, right? So in that situation, the stone people were the Reiki healers. So something that has really been kind of in the forefront of my consciousness is kind of wanting to expand that bandwidth of Reiki so that it is focused, beyond just the human possibilities, and how can we bridge it so that we're including, all sentient beings, and also beings that we may not think of as sentient, but that can still hold the energy and bring that light to us in other ways. And again, I'm just kind of going on a tangent here. I haven't done this in a long time, but something I remember that I used to do a lot was I would attune a vase of water to Reiki, and then put flowers in it that were about to die, right? And after a couple hours, those flowers would just be blooming, like they would just be beaming. And so, and again, I'm getting a little far-fetched here, but sometimes I think, what would happen like in agriculture if the farms used water that was all attuned to Reiki? Like, what would that vibration do to the plants, to our food, to the land as the water moves into the land? So, and that's just one little spectrum of how could we use this light in ways to improve the planet as a whole. So I think that there's so much potential and possibility in terms of where this light can go. Uh, and again, I know you were asking a bigger question. Even in Reiki alone, there's a lot that can be explored with here. And so that's where I get excited. That's where I think there's so much potential to explore what's possible.
It is exciting. And the way you answered it, perfect, perfect answer. And you brought up animal Reiki and, Colleen and the group over at ICRT, how they developed that. And that is one of the courses that I teach as well. And I have to tell you, um, it's so much more than animals. It's about all of life. It's about the earth, the animals, the water, the plants, the trees. It's about all of it. And it can help all of life here, including the earth. And it is very exciting to me when I teach those courses because I always go into it thinking that it's going to be a certain way. And then at the end, it's just, wow, I'm just in awe of what comes through. And, not just for me, but the students. And so, yeah, and that's a newer style of Reiki. So we see the evolution. And I had a student. I had a student a few years ago, and we were in the middle of class, and this was just a regular Reiki class, not an animal Reiki. And she said, "I'll never be bored again." And And isn't that hilarious and so true? And that's what popped into my mind when you were talking about agriculture and how we might use this. And also, I want to just give a shout out to water. You said you attune the water for the flowers. I think there is a hidden, and whatever that means, but I think there is the potential for water to heal and to transform like we have never imagined. I feel that very strongly. And it's also not an accident that our bodies have so much water in them. And I actually believe I'm interested if you would have an opinion about this. The attunement or placement or whatever it is, but when a Reiki student is attuned, however that is, to the Reiki energy, I feel as though water is part of that. If maybe there's an imprint that happens or some sort of a shift in the water of the person. What do you think about that?
I've never thought of that before, but it would totally make sense. Just in terms of that, yeah, that we are mostly water, and water does hold, energetic imprints. And so that it would just totally make sense that if you're dealing with energy healing, and we are mostly water, and there's energy, we're healing and releasing energetic imprints, then certainly water would be, if nothing else, then just a very powerful conduit for that process. But yeah, I had never really thought to look at that, but that certainly totally makes sense. Yeah.
Well, it's just that there's no part of our body without water, right? And so it's a common denominator of all life on Earth, and even shaping of the earth through erosion, and water's in the air. Even we don't even think about the air being much of anything, but water's in the air too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're breathing it in all the time. So I don't know. I just have fun kind of thinking about things like that. But so thank you for indulging me on that. But you mentioned your card deck, and so that is an innovation that you've recently released out into the world. And so you mentioned a little bit about it, and how it incorporates the Reiki crystal. But yeah, please go ahead now and really describe the deck for us. And, what's the thinking behind it? How can it help us? What's your vision for how it can help people?
Yeah. So I'll start with just a little history of how it came to be. So literally, it was in winter of 2017. I think it was maybe around January of 2017. I was doing a healing at a small center in Mount Kisco, New York. It was a group healing where I was using my Reiki crystal to work on everyone in the room simultaneously. And at the end of the healing, this woman who I'd never met comes up from the back of the room. She walks up and says, "Hi, my name's Allison DiNicola, and I work for US Games, and would you like to do a Reiki deck with us?" And I was like, "Yes, I would love to." And so the reason I mentioned it's not something where I had really planned. It's just, it literally, the universe kind of placed it in my lap. And not just her coming to me in that moment, but also the way everything lined up afterwards. So she, in the contract process, US Games was like, you could pick from a list of artists that we've worked with who we'd recommend, or if there's somebody that you want to work with, you could explore that as well. So they had given me a list of artists, and I looked at their websites, and they were all wonderful artists, but nothing was really pulling at me. And then I began to think, well, in my work at Omega Institute, I've come across a number of amazing artists, and one of whom is a fellow named Ben Scheikowitz, who actually used to be my assistant at Omega. And so I was looking at his work online, and as I was looking at his work online, I would see there were paintings that he had created that in my mind, like, already, okay, this is that card and this is that card. And so not that the whole deck was already created, but I think maybe like 6 or 7 paintings that he already had created in my mind were perfect fits for what I would see in terms of fitting with the deck. And one of those cards is of a woman named Amina Eagle, who was part of the founding of Omega. She's no longer on this plane of reality, but there's this beauty. She was always known for just embodying this deep sense of kindness. And I remember looking at this portrait that he had done of her online, and I'd seen it before, but when I was looking at it online, it just really clicked. I'm like, that card should be about the precept of kindness. And so I wanted to obviously have Amina's approval. It's her image that we would be using in the deck. And so she was, I think, in her early 90s at this point, or late 80s. And I sent her a Facebook message saying, "Amina, Ben and I just signed this contract with US Games. We're going to be doing a Reiki deck, and we would love to have your image be one of the cards, the card for kindness, for the precept of kindness." And I remember her writing back saying, "I would be so honored to be part of your deck." And then 2 days later, she passed on from this realm. And so it just felt like everything lined up as it was kind of meant to be for everything to fall into place. So I just wanted to share that little bit about the history of the deck. In terms of the structure of the deck, it's structured as a deck of cards with 44 cards. There are 4 suits, 11 cards in each suit. The suits are, there's what I call the suit of Reiki's foundation, which has images around Mikao Usui and certain symbols and certain specific treatments. So for example, the Reiki lasers that I talked about that are part of the psychic Reiki techniques is in that suit. So there's a whole list of kind of treatments and possibilities that are in that suit of 11 cards. Then there's another 11 cards that is about what I call Reiki meditations, because again, the Reiki crystal can bring people into different meditative states. So there's these 11 meditation cards. And then there's also the suit of what I call angels, avatars, and divine beings, which those cards have what I call Reiki portals. And I've always thought, even in my traditional first degree training, I always thought, the distance symbol, that's really a portal, right? It's moving energy from one point to the next, and it's a portal. So so the Reiki crystal can use that process to create energetic portals to things that might bring in more healing light. So it's such as a portal to Buddha, or a portal to Jesus, or a portal to Kuan Yin. And so or to different angels. So in that suit, there's 11 cards that have what I call Reiki portals to these different angels, saints, and divine beings, just to bring their additional energy into a healing. And then the last suit is what I call the suit of Reiki treatments, and those are very specific treatments, like treatments to the mental body or emotional body or chakras or organs and organ systems, and so each card is empowered to its own Reiki crystal. So the cards can actually send you energy, again, on request of the person who has the deck. And the person who has the deck does not even have to have any Reiki training to use the deck. All they have to do is to be able to ask the card to send healing, and the cards will do so. I have to say, I've had really powerful experiences sharing the deck. One of the experiences was last September. Ben Scheikowitz, the artist, and I were doing a presentation at Omega Institute on the deck. And Omega Institute, for those who aren't familiar with, it's a wonderful holistic retreat center in upstate New York. And sometimes during weeks where we might have some extra room, we will often invite different groups come that might be doing important nonprofit work or work that aligns with our mission. So there happened to be a group of veterans who were at Omega that particular evening, who were doing deep work on healing from the trauma of war. And many of them happened to come to our event that night, where we were doing this healing using the Reiki deck. And the funny thing is, that evening we had some cake in the cafe because we were celebrating after the healing, and there was a whole table of those vets who were sitting at the table. And again, this was after our presentation, and we had some extra cake, so we walked some extra cake and offered it over to them, and they were all talking about how much they really enjoyed our presentation, how much they enjoyed the healing, the power of the healing. And I thought, well, that's nice that these vets were there and that they really enjoyed the healing. And then my mind went elsewhere. I was thinking about other things. And then it really hit home a few days later when the CEO of Omega came up to me at a meal and said, Brett, I want to let you know that the vets who were here last week all reported how they were deeply moved and deeply affected by the experience that they had with your Reiki deck at the Ram Dass Library. So when it got back to me in that way, it just hit home in a bigger way that these cards really do have powerful healing ability, and that they can be useful to people no matter the walk of life. And you can be an energy healer or trained as an energy healer, or you can be anybody who's just looking for healing, and that these cards can be very beneficial in that way.
It is really cool, I'm gonna say, that you don't have to have Reiki training to use the cards. I just think that that's so inclusive and helpful. It just widens the scope of how the cards could be used, and how often and for whom, and Oh my goodness. I guess the question I can hear from the audience now is what about permission? So if they go out and they get the cards and they want to, heal all their family members and things like that, with these cards, where does permission come in? What would your advice be there?
Yeah, so I always teach, and I do believe I also mentioned that in the guidebook that comes with the cards that it's always in the best practice to have a person's permission when you're sending healing, that you don't want to be just randomly throwing Reiki at people, because you want to honor their process and their choice and where they are in their journey. So for me, that's a big part of it, is just honoring people's free will and not wanting to impose our will on other people, even if it's a well-meaning will that we want to bring healing. We don't want to impose that. And so I always encourage people to ask before sending, and even if using the cards to send, then you should still ask and send only if you're getting permission to do so.
Thank you so much for adding that. And, for our BTRG insiders here on the show, we're going to stay after, and Brett's going to offer a healing. So all of our insiders get to experience that with him. So, gosh, but for today's show, we're going to have to wrap up, Brett. So, for everybody who is wanting to go further, wanting to connect with you, please let them know how they can best do that.
Yeah, you can find me on my website. I've got two websites, but the first one is my name, brettbevell.com. So BRETTBEVELL.com. And that has pretty much my events, like where I'm teaching in person, which is usually at Omega Institute. And then I have another website, which is more about my online offerings. That website is called academyofloveandlight.us. So again, either brettbevell.com or academyofloveandlight.us. You can also find me on Facebook. I try to be pretty responsive if people send me messages on Facebook. So if you have a question about any of my work or anything you want to ask, I try to, again, respond pretty quickly. So feel free to reach out to me there as well.
So kind of you, Brett. I know you must be very, very busy, and to take time out and answer people and all of that and connect with them, I'm sure is very appreciated. Thank you so much for being here with us, sharing all that you did, which was so much. What a rich episode that you have offered here. Thank you
And
so much.
thank you again for having me on. It's been a pleasure to be discussing this with you and sharing this with you. So thank you so much.
Hello, it's Andrea, and in addition to being your host here at the podcast, I'm the founder of Mainstream Reiki, where bringing Reiki further into the mainstream is my mission. I offer quality Reiki classes of all levels to students attending live from around the world. And I've built a membership community as well to help Reiki people connect with each other through discussions, events, and Reiki practice. So if you're considering learning Reiki, or you already have, I invite you to visit mainstreamreiki.com to discover your next step in your Reiki journey. Thank you for listening, and you can check the show notes or visit the website beyondthereikigateway.com to find out more about the podcast and connect with me. Please keep in mind that views and opinions expressed in the show don't necessarily reflect those of the podcast or anyone affiliated with its production or advertising. This program is presented for your entertainment only, and all information provided is to be utilized at the listener's own discretion. I, along with the BTRG team, hope you enjoy the show as much as we enjoy making it for you. Wishing you highest blessings until we meet again beyond the Reiki Gateway.